Ruby and Ruffalo, a sharp mind, she almost achieved straight A's in law school. Her husband, John, was no less intelligent, but tragedy struck when he mysteriously died. John's death sparked an investigation filled with shocking accusations, and chilling secrets gradually came to light. It was as if a voice from beyond was guiding the truth into the light. Can a dead man speak? Or is someone playing a dangerous game? Amid the grief of widowhood and the whirlwind of legal battles, Ruby was forced to fight not only to seek justice for her husband, but also to protect her own freedom. Langford, British Columbia, October 25, 2003. After a week of relentless rain, a hiker followed a trail in Mount Wells Regional Park. On the outskirts of Victoria, the narrow path ran parallel to an old, abandoned drainage pipe. As he stepped down near the pipe, he suddenly froze. Something looked strange. Emerging from the darkness of the pipe, something sent a chill down his spine. A hand. His heart pounding. The hiker realized he had just stumbled upon a corpse. Without hesitation, he immediately called 911. Within minutes, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police arrived at the scene. The body of a white male, in his mid-30s, was discovered in the West Shore area of Langford. No identification, no visible wounds. He hadn't been stabbed. He hadn't been shot. But what had killed him? The victim's identity was quickly confirmed. John Ruffalo, 36 years old, who had been reported missing 5 days earlier by none other than his wife, Ruby. Ruby Anjuba was born in 1956 in a remote community in Terrace, British Columbia. From a young age, she showed intelligence and promise, enrolling at the University of Victoria. However, upon arriving in Victoria, a familiar pattern began to emerge in her life. Ruby dropped out, got married, quickly divorced, and then fell into a new relationship. Unfortunately, both relationships were fraught with abuse. Each romance left her with a child, and by the age of 30, Ruby was struggling to raise 4 children on her own. Life became increasingly difficult, and in 1986 she decided to return to her family's farm in Terrace. But 2 years later, in 1988, she left once again, this time returning to Victoria without her children. Back in the city, Ruby was determined to change her life. She went back to school, completed her degree, and it was there that she met John Ruffalo, a man 11 years younger than her. Despite the age gap, they quickly formed a bond. John was outgoing, charismatic, and passionate, while Ruby was drawn to his warmth and devotion. In April 1990, they got married. Ruby's children from previous relationships remained with their family, while she and John built a new home together, welcoming a daughter. Although Ruby had a university degree and John did not, she chose to stay home to care for their child while John became the family's breadwinner, working hard to support them. As Ruby continued to pursue her education, John became increasingly involved in real estate. However, studying law was never easy, and life wasn't always smooth. In 1998, shortly after Ruby graduated from law school, John suddenly faced charges for violating the Real Estate Act of British Columbia. Once again, turmoil struck, presenting new challenges for their marriage. John eventually broke the law and was convicted of 22 offenses. However, instead of serving prison time, he was only fined $14,000 and forced to give up his job as a prison guard. Meanwhile, Ruby's career was also struggling. Despite graduating from law school, she found herself unemployed, unable to secure a foothold in the industry. Marital tensions escalated. The relationship between Ruby and John became so distant that they no longer even shared the same bed. Long work days and the pressures of life made the household atmosphere suffocating. Even their 12-year-old daughter, Giovanna, could sense the growing rift between her parents. That summer, John seemed increasingly detached from his family. One night, he bluntly asked his daughter, "Do you want me to leave?" Giovanna, though still a child, understood that her parents' marriage was on the verge of collapse. Yet John promised her that he wouldn't go. But that promise didn't last long. Not long after, John mysteriously disappeared, leaving behind unanswered questions. On the evening of October 19, 2003, just before 11 p.m., the shift manager at Brink Security called Ruby Ann Ruffalo. His voice was tense as he asked, "Where's John? He didn't show up for work." Ruby was confused. She didn't know where John was. Over the phone, her bewilderment was as evident as the manager's concern. But the real worry began the next morning when John still hadn't returned home. Ruby started feeling uneasy. She turned to Vivian Kirkland, a close friend who lived in the basement apartment of her house. The two women quickly went to the police station to report John missing, but the police remained unfazed. They told Ruby not to worry because John had been missing for less than 24 hours. "Maybe he just got drunk somewhere and will be home soon," they reassured her. However, the day passed with no sign of John. By evening, when the 24-hour mark since his disappearance was reached, his family and friends were genuinely alarmed. John's phone rang nonstop. Messages flooded in. Ruby seemed to be spiraling into panic. One of her tenants recalled that she paced back and forth incessantly, so anxious she was nearly frantic. By October 22, 2 days after John was reported missing, his family began to believe that something terrible had happened. That afternoon, John's brother-in-law was refueling at a local gas station when he suddenly recognized a familiar-looking car. As he moved closer to inspect it, he confirmed it was John's car. But John was nowhere to be found. Alarmed, his brother-in-law immediately called the police. When officers searched the vehicle, they found a suspicious detail. John's wallet was still inside, along with his identification. This raised a series of questions. Why would John abandon both his car and wallet? Where had he gone? And most importantly, what had really happened to him? The police immediately tried to contact Ruby to inform her of the discovery and to ask more about John. Strangely, it took them until the next day to reach her. Shortly afterward, the police received a call from Ruby's lawyer. He said that Ruby wanted to meet with them and was willing to assist in the investigation. When Ruby arrived at the police station, she wasn't alone. Beside her was Vivian Kirkland, her loyal friend. During the interview, Ruby explained that Vivian was there for emotional support, while her lawyer accompanied her to ensure everything proceeded properly. When asked about her husband's disappearance, Ruby admitted that it was highly unusual. "John would usually call me or leave a message," she said. But then she followed with an even more shocking claim. John might have been involved in a dark secret. According to Ruby, John had a habit of using drugs. She had even left him briefly because of it, but they eventually reconciled. However, she never fully trusted him. And just days before John went missing, Ruby claimed she had found evidence to support her suspicions. While cleaning the house, she discovered that John had hidden a large sum of cash, $7, taped to the back of a cabinet. But when the police searched Ruby and John's home, they found no trace of the cash she had mentioned. The $7 had vanished, and so had John. Was this merely a coincidence? Or did John have a real reason to hide the money? Were drug dealers hunting him down? A new theory began to emerge. Perhaps John was on the run due to debts owed to drug traffickers. But to the police, this scenario seemed unconvincing. John's family didn't believe it either. As investigators continued to track and verify Ruby's statements, they noticed a major issue. There was no evidence to suggest that John was a drug addict. A heavy user couldn't possibly manage 3 jobs at once. It was almost impossible. John's sister outright rejected this theory. "There's no way he would just leave," she insisted, worry etched across her face. And as each day passed without any sign of John, his family began to fear the worst. Saturday, October 25, 6 days after John's disappearance, a hiker descending from Mount Wells Regional Park stumbled upon a horrifying sight: the body of a man inside an old drainage culvert. Panicked, he immediately called 911. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police quickly arrived at the scene, calling in a crime scene analyst to assist with the situation. As investigators pulled the body from the culvert, they compared it to a photo in the missing persons file. The results confirmed the family's worst fears. The deceased man was John Ruffalo. The grief of losing him was already devastating, but the way he was found left his family even more haunted. What had killed him? At first glance, the body showed no signs of beating or obvious violence. Hoping to find answers, investigators hiked up the mountain to what was believed to be the entrance of the culvert. There, they discovered discarded drug paraphernalia. This evidence seemed to align with Ruby's claim that John was a drug user. But was it really true? Had John overdosed and died tragically? The police weren't entirely convinced. Something felt off. Drug addicts didn't typically wander into the woods to inject themselves. And if John had truly been an addict, why did none of his family and friends believe it? On the night of October 26, 2003, officers from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police knocked on the door of Ruby Ann Ruffalo's home in the suburbs of Victoria. Just a day earlier, a hiker had discovered the body of her missing husband, John Ruffalo. He was only 36 years old. Ruby had reported John missing 6 days prior. Just 2 days before his body was found, she had told investigators that John was a drug addict, possibly in debt, and even suggested that he might have taken his own life due to the pressures of drugs and money. At first glance, John's death seemed to align with Ruby's statement. But was that really the case? While John's family and friends mourned his loss, investigators began asking questions. An initial theory suggested that John might have taken his own life with drugs. But there was a major problem. Many details didn't add up. If John had truly walked up the mountain to inject himself, why was his car found abandoned more than 8 miles away? And if John hadn't gone there himself, then who had taken his body up the mountain? The next question, who had done it? On October 28, 2003, an unexpected witness came forward, providing police with a shocking statement. This witness was Robert Johnson, a man struggling with alcoholism. He claimed that Ruby Ann Ruffalo, along with her close friend Vivian Kirkland, had approached him and offered him an $8 bottle of sherry, a cheap bribe, but one tempting enough for someone like Johnson. But the most shocking part was Ruby's request. She wanted him to do a special job, a gruesome task, to kill John Ruffalo. Johnson recounted that he had immediately refused. However, Ruby didn't give up. She listened to Johnson's suggestion for a more discreet method of murder, a hot shot, a lethal overdose of heroin, ensuring the victim's death without leaving any trace of foul play. This statement could not be taken lightly. Police recalled what Ruby had previously claimed, that John was a drug addict. They had also found drug paraphernalia near where John's body had been discovered. Everything was starting to connect into a suspicious plot. But Johnson's story wasn't over. He went on to reveal that on the night of October 19, the night John disappeared, Ruby had contacted him again. When Johnson arrived at her house, he was shocked to see Ruby and Vivian Kirkland standing in the driveway with John's lifeless body. Ruby had offered him more alcohol in exchange for his help disposing of the corpse. But once again, Johnson refused. He walked away, leaving Ruby and Vivian standing there with a dead body and a dark secret. If Johnson's story was true, this was a premeditated murder. But what puzzled the police was the motive. If Ruby truly wanted her husband dead, why had she only offered Johnson a cheap bottle of wine? And for someone with a law degree like Ruby, why would she attempt to recruit a homeless alcoholic to carry out her plan? As police were still considering the credibility of Robert Johnson's testimony, 2 more unexpected witnesses came forward, making the case even more disturbing. This time, it was Jonathan Horton, an 18-year-old, and his mother, Linda, a former tenant of the Ruffalo family. Linda revealed a shocking truth. More than a year and a half before John's disappearance, Ruby Ann Ruffalo had approached her son and offered him money to kill her husband. Jonathan told the police that he had immediately refused. But instead of letting it go, Jonathan's mother, Linda, confronted Ruby directly. Ruby's reaction? Not a single denial. In fact, according to Linda, Ruby even repeated the offer to her, offering to pay her to kill John Ruffalo. And once again, the offer was rejected. This revelation raised a puzzling question. If John knew that his wife had plotted to kill him, why did he continue living with her for another year and a half? Any ordinary person who discovered their spouse wanted them dead would immediately go to the police or leave. But John didn't. The reason might lie in another secret one that John's mother revealed to the police. John Ruffalo had been having an affair, and he was planning to file for divorce. Toxicology results seemed to confirm Robert Johnson's account of a hot shot, a lethal dose of heroin strong enough to kill instantly. But there was an even more crucial detail. Although Ruby had claimed John was a drug addict, there were no signs of chronic drug use. Only a single needle mark was found on John's arm. This suggested that the fatal heroin dose could have been his first and only injection, one that someone else had administered. Not only that, but heroin wasn't the only substance found in John's body. Tests also detected amitriptyline, a drug that can cause paralysis and render a victim defenseless. Could Ruby have mixed the drug into John's food or drink, knocking him unconscious before injecting him with heroin? The only problem was, how could police prove it? On March 3, 2004, the investigation into John Ruffalo's mysterious death took a critical turn. Police searched Ruby's home, including the basement apartment of Vivian Kirkland, her close friend and a potential accomplice. There they found a prescription and a bottle of amitriptyline in Vivian's room. A chilling coincidence. This was the exact drug found in John Ruffalo's body during the autopsy. On March 4, 2004, Canadian police returned to Ruby Ruffalo's home. This time, they weren't just there to gather more evidence, they were there to arrest both Ruby and Vivian Kirkland. Ruby Ruffalo, the prime suspect, was completely stunned as the handcuffs snapped around her wrists. She didn't utter a word, but the shock was evident on her face. Soon after, both women were taken to the police station. As the interrogation room door closed, Ruby remained eerily composed. She refused to make any statements and immediately requested a lawyer, a classic move for someone well-versed in the law. But Vivian Kirkland was different. Held in the interrogation room next door, Ruby's closest friend became the center of the investigation. Detectives were determined to uncover her true role in John Ruffalo's death. At first, Vivian tried to deny any involvement, but how long could she stay silent when the evidence against her kept piling up? On March 3, 2009, nearly 6 years after John Ruffalo's body was found in the woods outside Victoria, British Columbia, and almost 5 years after Ruby Ruffalo's arrest, she finally stood trial for her husband's murder. John's family had waited far too long for justice, and what angered them most was that Ruby had spent nearly 5 years out on bail, free as if nothing had happened. With a law degree from one of Canada's top universities, Ruby knew the legal system inside and out, and perhaps she had used that knowledge to delay the case, hoping it would fade into obscurity. But Judgment Day had come. That morning in court, the prosecutor opened the trial with a statement that sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Ruby Ruffalo had killed her husband because he was leaving her. But this was not just a crime of passion. John had planned to divorce her, and that meant dividing assets, a prospect Ruby could not accept. To her, everything they owned, from real estate investments to every dollar in their bank accounts, belonged to her, not to John. And when she realized she might lose it all, Ruby took action. But the prosecutor had more than just a theory. They had a crucial witness, someone who had once been Ruby's most loyal accomplice, Vivian Kirkland. After years of protecting Ruby, standing by her side like a shadow, Vivian finally broke under the weight of the investigation. She testified, exposing the entire murder plot that Ruby had orchestrated. With overwhelming evidence, On November 18, 2010, the judge delivered the final verdict. Ruby Ruffalo was guilty of first-degree murder. Her sentence: life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years. After nearly 8 years of uncertainty, pain, and despair, John's family could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Justice had been served. The man they loved, a husband, a son, a brother, had not died in silence. Though nothing could ever replace their loss, at least they knew that the perpetrator had been rightfully punished.